reports, that we are engaged in oversight, engaged in supervision, and the public should know that we're on the job. Where there are violations, those violators should pay the penalties according to law. But let me add this, because this is a chance to talk about campaign finance in response. The only way under Citizens United, until there's a reversal of Citizens United, or until there's a constitutional amendment, the only way to combat dark money, huge corporate PAC money, wealthy people coming into the electoral space is public matching funds and public financing of elections. It's the only thing that gives an average American the opportunity to compete. It's the only thing. There's no other way to run any election really in these times without some sort of ability to pay for the messaging. And I think in the public financing space, we can do much, much better. New York City has a great model. It applies to primaries, it applies to generals, it applies to their assembly seats. It's a 6-to-1 match. It limits how much can be raised, but it gives those folks who are just average Americans a fighting chance. Someone like me who's a teacher, a current job, I came from my job today, it gives us an opportunity to try to compete at a statewide level that we would not be able to when you see millionaires and billionaires coming into these spaces with the ability to buy points in elections. You have huge corporate PACs who are advertising with the ability. The only way to have a fighting chance is through public matching funds that supports our democracy.
Okay, I'll give you a little extra time, Ms. Beatty. But do you have the question? Yeah, I just want to make sure the question is full question. Cool.
There is another way. It's called a grassroots campaign, which is what I'm doing. It is also one of those ways where you're not necessarily, reaching out to your buddies who are politicians to kind of sway them or, pay for the outcome of elections that you're more interested in. When we talk about accessibility, I think that the concern here is that the general public doesn't necessarily need to go through and do 13 clicks to be able to find out who's been lobbying and what's been going on. Accessibility means like a big shiny billboard that says that you have been taking money from, a naughty guy, right? Let's be that accessible. Let's be that transparent. No one's going to advocate for that, right? Politicians don't want to hear that part. They want to tell you that, they worked a regular job, and sure they did. And that they're just like every one of us. Sure you are, I agree with that. But also when it comes to those type of relationships that they build, and when you look at the funding that they receive, are they really advocating for the people, or are they advocating for folks who have lined their pockets? And so one way is that we look at what amount of money that Mr. Moore has received, what percentage of it is special interest groups, and that, heaven forbid, what happens when he enters in that seat? Will he be advocating for you or for the folks who gave $100,000 to support his campaign, right? Or for someone who's running a grassroots campaign, who's not asking your grandmother to, empty out her Social Security's fund to be able to support our candidate, but to be able to talk to folks and say, if you can donate, that's great. But here's me putting in the effort, knocking on the doors, getting volunteers, getting folks engaged. And that is the process where you can, in fact, run a campaign. And we don't necessarily need to do these lowball tactics of we're saying millionaires, because there are folks who aren't millionaires that are still doing these same behaviors.
Right,
I'd like to respond.
Go right ahead.
Thank you.
30 seconds.
So special interests. Let's talk about who the special interests are that have donated to my campaign. Nurses, teachers, firefighters, frontline workers in grocery stores, CNAs. The special interest PACs that have donated to my campaign are labor unions. That's the everyday person that is contributing their funds to their labor union. Their labor union is sending money toward people that value their work. These are the people that make America work. I am proud that they support me. I'm proud to support them. I don't know how the Secretary of State's office would be influenced by those labor unions. We talked about the jobs that exist under the office. 94% of my money comes from Rhode Islanders. The average contribution is $70. I would say that no one that's running for statewide office can make both those claims at the same time. This is not a wealthy campaign. I'm out knocking on doors. I'm in a grassroots campaign as well. I'm talking to people. Yes, I've built relationships over the course of 10 years. I'm proud of the support I have from my colleagues in government. They trust me. They think I'm somebody that can get the job done. They've seen my legislative record. They know that there's accomplishment there. They know that the legislation that I sponsor is benefiting, by and large, the quality of life for Rhode Islanders. So I don't apologize for accepting special interest money. If the special interest money we're talking about, and it can only be that money, is coming from teachers and nurses and firefighters and frontline food and commercial workers, I gladly accept that money.
I would say that those folks who are first responders, my mom is still a CNA to this day. My sister is actually a pediatrician at MGH. Folks who have been on the front line for COVID can't afford to be financing politicians. Folks who have worked in the union, I was also a member of the union, can't afford to be spending that money in that regard. Gas prices are high, it's really high to even buy regular groceries. And so when we say grassroots campaign, the definition of a grassroots campaign is vastly different from what you're describing, but we can agree to disagree.
We can.
Okay. I'm going to try to wrestle this back on course a little bit, and we're going to go back to 90 seconds for questions and responses. But also, I'm going to get it back on lobbying, because I had a follow-up question on lobbying, and I think we lost track of that. And what more needs to be done to make sure that lobbyists are not engaging in such pay-to-play when they are writing big checks and holding big fundraisers for politicians? What regulations would you advocate for in that regard? And yes, Ms. P.
Please repeat the question. I'm
Sure.
sorry.
It's about lobbyists. What more needs to be done to make sure that lobbyists are not engaging in pay-to-play when they are writing big checks and holding big fundraisers for politicians? And what regulations would you advocate for to get that kind of under control?
So I understand the need to advocate for a particular group that's protected under the First Amendment, that you have free speech, right? And we want to respect that. What comes into play here is, as you mentioned, with raising large funds of money, you'd be more than susceptible, I would say, to be influenced in that direction to provide outcome to benefit a particular group that would necessarily marginalize others. One thing that I would recommend is that we no longer participate in these when we're running for our campaigns, that we would be really neutral in the sense that we are representative of, we are public servants, and that we represent that space well. That when we look at the folks who are lining the coffers of our opponents, that does not necessarily mean that that needs to appeal to our inner flesh, that we can really hone into what our responsibility is and what the office entails. And so the office of Secretary of State, in my opinion, should be completely neutral, regardless of political party, regardless of political affiliation. So you would not want to be a part of that in any respects, because you would not want to give any type of impression that you have been influenced, coerced, even if you feel that you haven't been, to a particular group.
Thank you. Representative Amore?
So I would go back to the public matching funds and a more robust public campaign finance. I think that is the only way for the average person to compete in this space. And while it's noble to want this to remain a neutral situation, we're in a Democratic primary as part of a political process. The old saying goes, it's very hard to take politics out of politics. And it's very difficult to run any campaign without the ability to get your message out there. No matter how grassroots it is, you can't knock every door across the state. It's really impossible to knock every door across a Senate district effectively and meet people. I will say this, Rhode Island is the most restrictive of any states when it comes to what you can contribute. Our threshold is $1,000 per year. And I think that's good. I think that's right where it should stay. Because that does not lead to quid pro quo. I can tell you that there are individuals who have donated to my campaigns in the past who have advocated for things I am adamantly opposed to. I have members of the charter school community who have donated to my campaign. I'm not anti-charter, but I want to work on the funding and finance for that. I have not supported their legislation, but they've donated to my campaign because they think I'm a public servant who has integrity and honesty. But I think the only way to tackle this is that model that New York is using now, which is a more robust system, and to keep the cap where it is.
Thank you. Question number 9. The Secretary of State processes, preserves, and gives the public access to hundreds of thousands of historic documents and public records. They also maintain the open meetings portal where the public can find information about all meetings at every level of government, except for the General Assembly, which they themselves immune to the Open Meetings Act. When it comes to making government more accessible and transparent, what more can be done? What educational resources can be brought to bear? What can be done to strengthen enforcement of the Open Meetings Act? And I know that the Secretary of State doesn't necessarily enforce the Open Meetings Act, that's the AG, but there is, the Open Meetings portal does give you some authority in that.
Yeah, so let's talk about enforcement. I actually think that the model should look like the Board of Elections AG model. So I think the Secretary of State's office should be keeping track of violations of the open meetings law, investigating those violations, and then when they see an opportunity where there is evidence that this is a pattern or it's a clear effort to keep information from the public or violating the public's right, then that should be referred to the Attorney General. Now, as currently situated, the office of the Secretary of State doesn't have the capacity to do that, but I think that's a better model. So that's one area. The other area would be improving the website. It does need improvement. It is not perfect. And what we see, and our colleagues in city and town government, is that we go and look at the meeting listed, but then we have to go to 2 different spaces to find out specifically what's on the agenda. That has to improve. That has to improve. And then finally, I would say we have a real opportunity to use the pandemic as a teacher, in that we can have people take part in public meetings and offer comment in public meetings remotely. And that should, I don't think that the body itself should be remote, unless we're in a pandemic situation again where it's dangerous. But I do think the public should be able to come in person, and they should be able to come remotely and offer testimony. We saw it work extremely well during the pandemic, and I'd be advocating for continuing that.
I would go a step further. So I agree with a lot of the items that you mentioned, but a step further in the sense that when you go into the open meetings, when you look at a meeting that's been posted, a lot of times at the agenda, the meeting minutes aren't even there. So instead of saying we're looking for habitual offenders, I think that there's clearly a tendency of why this keeps happening over and over. I think that at this point in time, we should be able to kind of find folks. So this is the requirements. Here's the expectation. If you don't meet a set expectation, here's what the penalty will be. Continue to meet the expectation on a second time, here's what the penalty will be. And enforce it in that space. If we keep giving passes, clearly it hasn't been taken seriously for X number of years, then this behavior kind of continues and we perpetuate the system. We're not really resolving anything when we're just going to say we're going to kick the bucket down the line and just give it to the AG's office. I'm sure that they are probably working on other things, but within our space, we can totally find a way to hold folks accountable, create, we have a problem, come up with a solution, and follow through with an execution of a plan instead of passing the buck to the next department.
So let's be clear, the Attorney General has this responsibility now, right?
It does,
The
but I'm just thinking
Department
like
of State,
idea of
but I think the statement that was just made indicates that we're kicking it to the Attorney General. The Attorney General has this power now.
Yeah.
I would suggest a bifurcated system where the Secretary of State's office does the investigatory work and points to it. Right now, all the burden is on the Attorney General. I just wanted to clarify.
Secretary of State could like write a ticket, and then they would have to.
That's what I'm
That would
talking
be
about.
the
But right
idea. I
now,
think both of you
the
sort of getting
sole
at that.
the sole power is with the AG now.
Right. That would be. I think that'd be an interesting. Okay.
But it hasn't been working, so that's what we're trying to fix, right?
Yeah.
So the AG is supposed to be doing this, they're not doing that. Creating a system where we are finding people, tagging it, following through, kind of for more solution-based approaches rather than kind of repeat.
There is a problem with like a couple of city councils,
Sure.
a couple of boards. for
And
sure.
this Attorney General has been much better than the last in this
Very much better,
space.
Very much better.
And I think the Department of State can have a role in that.
Yep. I do. Get towards the end here, so this is great. You guys were doing fantastic. Thank you. Incumbent Secretary of State Neil Grabea advocated for the construction of a new state archives to be built across the street from the State House that would properly conserve, preserve, and display our state's historic documents. Sadly, the General Assembly never approved this project. Is this something you would advocate for? And remember whose turn it is?
Yep.
Thank you, Ms. Beauty.
I would advocate for that. I think that it's really important that we preserve our history, that folks have the opportunity to see the immense stories of Rhode Island, of our Native Americans, of our, basketball teams, our little leagues, to be able to tell that story in a space that they can all come and visit. Another thing that I think that we can do best is also use technology in the space that it's easily accessible to be able to get that. So if you can't even be able to be in person, that you can be able to have that information readily accessible for you to be able to disseminate at your leisure. I believe that the General Assembly has okayed for this to move forward, but I'm not sure. These are the conversations that I've heard. So this is the whisper, I should say, the gossip.
My knowledge, it hasn't been passed.
Okay. The gossip in the room. My understanding is that using I would love for it to be in an older building. I think that preserves history. I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of history, and I like to preserve things for the way that they are. And to be able to host it in an older building, I think would speak to the richness of Rhode Island. I also understand that from a budget perspective, that a newer building was something that was considered more cost effective. And so I would like to be able to look at the budget, reassess, and to see what is the best way that we can kind of be able to deliver on that promise to folks that I think would be a cultural highlight for Rhode Island.
Senator Memorial.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. I supported it when the Secretary of State proposed it. It would require a statewide bond, either for a new building or to rehab and make appropriate a new one. Look, I think it can be an economic driver, a tourist driver. We are one of the original 13 colonies and one of the original 13 states. We see all around the country where people go to Philadelphia, where they go to Washington, D.C., where they go to New York, and they are focused in on historical tourism. And that's what this would provide. We have a plethora of documents. And I've been fortunate as a history teacher in Rhode Island to be able to access the archives and to use the archives and the resources that the office has provided and that the archives has provided in my class. And so I know what a tremendous space that is. Look, I've been talking about civic engagement for a long time. This is a piece of that for sure. I want to create a liaison system with every high school in Rhode Island and every college in Rhode Island where there's a faculty and staff member and a student who is a liaison to the department, both in the area of voter registration and in the area of curriculum, and using the archives to benefit those institutions and our communities at large. I think this is a really important space right now, considering the assault on democracy around the country, considering the conspiracy theories that are existing about our elections, about our democracy. It's really, civic education is really important. I talked to you before about my authorship of the Civic Literacy Act. I think that's an essential piece of legislation that I'm proud of.
Okay. Before we move on to final statements, I just want to say something about the archives. Right now, the earliest videos we have of the General Assembly, they first started videotaping, they're all on beta, stored in boxes, and we don't have a beta player in the state. The state doesn't own a beta player, so if you want to access these old videos, you can't watch them. And it would really be a worthwhile project, I think, to digitize those, get them up on the web or anywhere. Just a thought, throwing that out there since I have you here.
I remember one of my homeworks, I had to use microfilm, and that was really cool.
That's what I'm saying. So we can do better on this, and that would be fun. I tried to look at some of these old tapes, and you can't look at them. So anyway, closing statements, and I think we're going to you, Representative Amore.
Thank you. And again, thank you for the opportunity. I think it was a fantastic discussion. I appreciate Stephanie's input. I appreciate everybody being here. Look, for better or worse, and I'd like to think better, I'm a known commodity. I've been a public servant officially for 10 years. I have served my community with what I believe is integrity and honesty. I have operated in a space where I'm trying to improve the lives of Rhode Islanders, whether that be legislation that deals with coverage for chemotherapy, whether that be legislation that deals with a chronic illness, whether that be legislation that deals with expanding insurance coverage, whether it be legislation that reforms some of the things we do in education, whether it be instituting the ELL categorical so that we have funding for English language learners, did not exist before I became the chairman of the Education Subcommittee on Finance. These are things that I've worked on, that I'm passionate about in the public policy space. I believe because of my background in public education, specifically in history, because I've managed a large system in the East Providence school system with the athletic department, and because I'm familiar with how to navigate state government, I'm a good choice for this seat, and I would appreciate your consideration on or before September 13th. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Judy, the final word goes to you.
I graduated from Gilbert Stewart. I went to Hope High School, which is down the road. I am a local person here. My daughter goes to Festival Ballet, and we go across to get a chocolate croissant after she does a good job at pre-K, which means she sat down, she focused, and she got her work done. Why I'm running for Secretary of State, I think I've answered. Why I would be a better candidate is that we need someone who's neutral, someone who truly understands how to get the job done. If there was someone more qualified, I promise you I would not be here. I have unlimited vacation right now, and I've enjoyed that for a number of years. I am walking away from the luxuries and the amenities that I have because I see that there is a problem, and this wheel keeps turning, and it is getting really old. It has gotten very boring, and it's getting very tiring really, really fast. Tax-paying funding has been wasted. When we talk about legislation that we've drafted, that's all good and well to a certain extent, where folks are still talking about the same problems at the polling station that existed 10 years ago to today. Besides COVID, that's not even the point. We won't even get down that road. When we talk about small businesses, they're talking about struggling before COVID. So we won't even get to today. So that's besides the point. So we have someone that's been doing politics for a very long time. And we have seen what that has gotten us. Nowhere. We get the same career politicians that get promoted up and up through the ranking. And here is the time that we stop that now. We have an opportunity to literally make a to use our civic duty and exercise and make our own judgment, not what your paid advertisers told you, not what someone else paid for someone to tell you on national television, for you to make an informed decision to look at what is at stake here. It is the next election cycle. That is what is at stake. We want to make sure that we are no longer having polarizing elections. We want to make sure that it's fair, fast, and accurate for everybody, not for some people, that no one gets left out. And we want to also make sure that small businesses succeed today. The time is now, and change happens when regular people decide to pull up their bootstraps and come today.
90 seconds, I'm sorry, don't mean
No
that.
worries.
Thank you very much. That was great. You can applaud now if you like. And I've been asked to remind everybody that on Thursday, September 1st, right here in this room, we're going to be having a mayoral debate for Providence. Gonzalo Cuervo, Nerval Fortune, Brett Smiley, run by the Community Libraries of Providence and League of Women Voters. So that should be very interesting. I was at the first one. It was some different questions, so might be worth showing up. Thank you, everybody. And thank you to those at home. Thank you so much. That was good. Yeah, we'll figure that out. Does anybody work? Well, person's better. We'll figure out a place. All right, thank you.